She's my boss's secretary, confident, graceful, and utterly off-limits. But the moment she whispered, "This stays between us," everything changed. The day began like any other, the office bathed in the soft hum of computers and the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. I pushed open the heavy glass doors, a little nervous despite the mundane nature of the meeting I was here for. That's when I first noticed her, my boss's secretary, poised behind the reception desk, her posture calm, but somehow magnetic. She was older than me, undeniably so, but it didn't feel like a barrier. Instead, there was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself, an ease that made the rest of the world feel slightly out of focus whenever she looked up. Our eyes met briefly as I approached. There was a flicker of something, curiosity, amusement, maybe recognition, and then her professional mask returned. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but confident, carrying a warmth that seemed almost personal. I responded, fumbling slightly with my briefcase, aware of the subtle shift in the air around us. Something about her presence made the ordinary office space feel charged, as if every glance and movement held unspoken significance. She handed me the file I had come for, and our fingers brushed for a fleeting moment. It was a brief contact, nothing more than a spark, but it was enough to make my heart skip. The world outside the office ceased to exist for a second. The faint rustle of papers, the hum of the air conditioner, even the soft ticking of a wall clock faded into the background. All I noticed was her hand, warm and steady, and the hint of her perfume, a subtle floral scent that lingered even after she stepped back. I couldn't help but watch her as she moved, small gestures drawing my attention. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with a casual grace, the slight tilt of her head when she was reading something on her computer screen, the way her lips curved in a small, thoughtful smile at the occasional joke from a colleague. Everything about her seemed intentional, yet effortless, and I realized I was already memorizing details I shouldn't be. Details that made her feel impossibly close and yet unreachable. She returned my gaze one more time before I turned to leave the desk, and I thought I saw the briefest flicker of amusement, or was it acknowledgement, before she looked away, refocusing on her work. I walked to the meeting room, file in hand, and felt an unfamiliar mixture of anticipation and hesitation. Something had shifted in that brief encounter, a quiet tension that hummed beneath the surface, a curiosity that made the mundane office walls feel charged with possibility. By the time I sat down at the conference table, I realized that this wasn't just a chance meeting. It was the beginning of something unspoken, a slow-burning connection that neither of us had yet named, but one I already sensed would change the rhythm of my days. The ordinary had become extraordinary, and all it took was a glance, a brush of fingers, and the subtle gravity of her presence. After that first encounter, the office felt subtly different, as if her presence had shifted the air around me. I found myself noticing the smallest details, the way she arranged files with deliberate care, the faint smile she gave a coworker, the quiet confidence in the way she moved. Every gesture, however ordinary, seemed layered with unspoken emotion, and I realized I was already drawn into observing her. It wasn't infatuation in the loud, overwhelming sense. It was quieter, more insistent. The kind of attention that lingers, even when no one else is watching. Our interactions in the days that followed were brief, but charged. She would pass me a file, and her fingertips would brush mine ever so lightly, a touch that lingered in my mind long after the moment had passed. Sometimes, as I handed her papers or signed forms at her desk, our hands would meet with deliberate slowness, as if neither of us wanted to break the connection we were beginning to recognize. Each time, a tiny warmth would spread through me, a quiet reminder that something unspoken was building between us. I began noticing subtler things about her. The way her hair caught the light, a gentle shine that made her look both approachable and impossibly elegant. The soft sound of her laughter, rare but genuine, echoing in the office and pulling at my attention. The way she would glance up at me from behind her desk, just for a moment, her eyes carrying a hint of curiosity and amusement. There was something hypnotic about these quiet moments, the way she commanded attention without demanding it. One afternoon, we found ourselves alone in the small office kitchen, both reaching for the coffee machine at the same time. Our hands touched briefly, and instead of recoiling, we shared a small, knowing smile. The room felt warmer, not from the coffee, but from the electricity in that fleeting contact. I realized that these small, mundane interactions were beginning to take on an entirely new dimension. Every shared glance, every accidental brush of skin felt deliberate in the way that matters in slow, careful storytelling. Meaningful, intentional, and emotionally resonant. She never rushed our exchanges, never allowed them to become overtly personal, yet the subtle intimacy was undeniable. The way she shifted slightly when I spoke, leaning just enough to hear me clearly. The soft arch of her eyebrow when something amused her. The careful way she would adjust her scarf or desk papers when I passed by. All of it communicated attention, presence, and an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond forming between us. By the end of the week, I realized that I was no longer merely visiting her desk for paperwork. I was visiting her, in the quiet, unobtrusive way that slow-burn attraction grows, through repeated, meaningful, and understated moments. It was in the silence, in the careful glances and soft touches, that the real story began. And in those quiet moments, I felt the first real stirrings of connection, of desire tempered by restraint, the kind of bond that promises something deeper than mere attraction, something emotional, sincere, and quietly impossible to ignore. It was one of those late afternoons when the office seemed quieter than usual. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving only the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the faint rustle of papers. I had stopped by her desk to drop off some documents, but she was already there, leaning slightly over a folder, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up as I approached, and for a moment, there was a flash of hesitation in her eyes, almost as if she were deciding whether to let me in. "Can I tell you something?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. There was a gravity to her tone that immediately drew me in. I nodded, careful not to break the quiet rhythm of the office, sensing instinctively that whatever she was about to share mattered. She paused, tapping a pen against the folder, as if gathering courage. "I made a mistake earlier today. Nothing catastrophic, but I worry it might cause some complications if it gets out," she confessed, her voice tinged with vulnerability. She looked down at her hands, folding and refolding them on the desk, a gesture so ordinary yet profoundly human. "I trust you, and, well, this stays between us." Her words were simple, but the weight behind them made the air feel warmer, heavier in the best possible way. She wasn't just sharing a secret. She was giving me access to a part of herself she rarely showed anyone, a quiet, personal moment of trust. I felt a surge of respect, mixed with a subtle, growing awareness of the intimacy forming between us. I placed my hand lightly over hers for a second, a brief touch that acknowledged her trust without intruding, letting her feel that I was there, not just as a colleague, but as someone who would honor her confidence. The sensation was grounding, electric even, in its restraint. Her hand lingered under mine just long enough to convey a shared understanding before she gently withdrew. We both looked up at each other then, and there was a shift in the space between us, a silent recognition that something deeper was beginning. It wasn't just the age difference, or the professional boundary, or the secrecy. It was the quiet awareness that someone had allowed me into a part of their life usually hidden from the world. And in that space, in that moment, a bond began to form that neither of us had yet named. I noticed the subtle details that made her human and approachable. The soft curve of her shoulders as she leaned forward, the faint scent of her perfume that seemed stronger in the still air, the careful way her lips pressed together as she watched me. Each nuance drew me in, making the office feel smaller, more intimate, a private world of trust and attention. By the time I left her desk that day, I realized this moment had changed something between us. The spark from our first encounter had deepened into something more, a quiet intimacy grounded in trust and respect. Every glance, every small touch from then on would carry the memory of this shared secret. And though the world outside might see us as nothing more than colleague and secretary, in that moment, we had crossed an invisible line, bound together by understanding, subtle desire, and the unspoken promise that some things are meant to be kept just between us. It was a quiet morning, the office bathed in the soft glow of sunlight filtering through the blinds. The hum of computers was steady, but there was something different in the air, a tension that had been building over the past few days, subtle yet unmistakable. I was walking past her desk with a stack of files when she looked up, her eyes meeting mine with a flicker of recognition and something softer, something almost hesitant. "Could you help me with these reports?" she asked, her voice calm, measured, but carrying an undercurrent of warmth. I nodded, moving closer, and for a moment, our hands brushed as I took the first folder from her. The contact was fleeting, yet it lingered in my mind long after it happened. It was the kind of touch that speaks volumes without a single word, an acknowledgement of connection, trust, and something unspoken, suspended between us. As we worked side by side, I became acutely aware of the small details. The subtle curve of her wrist as she turned pages, the faint scent of her perfume that clung softly to the air around her, and the way her hair fell just so when she leaned forward. Each gesture felt deliberate and yet natural, a rhythm that drew me in without demanding it. I found myself mirroring her movements, unconsciously leaning closer, brushing shoulders in the quiet confines of the office. Every motion carried weight. Every glance seemed to linger a fraction longer than necessary. Then, as I handed her the final folder, our hands met again, this time more deliberately. She didn't pull away immediately. Her fingers rested lightly over mine, a brief pause that stretched just long enough to make my heart beat faster. The warmth of her skin against mine, the quiet steadiness of her presence, and the slight tremor I imagined in her hand. All of it combined into a moment that felt suspended in time. For a second, it was as if the office no longer existed, only the closeness of our shared space and the unspoken acknowledgement that something had shifted between us. I caught her glance and saw the hesitation, the awareness that this touch meant more than it should, the same way I felt it. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, paired with a quiet confidence, that made the moment both thrilling and grounding. We didn't need words. The silence was enough to communicate what neither of us dared to say. Even after the touch ended and we moved apart, the sensation lingered. It wasn't just the physical contact. It was the awareness of the bond forming, the recognition of desire tempered by restraint, and the excitement of discovering emotional intimacy in the small, deliberate touches of daily life. Every brush of hands, every accidental shoulder touch, now carried significance. The office, once ordinary, had transformed into a stage for quiet, meaningful gestures that spoke louder than words ever could. By the time I returned to my desk, I realized that the first touch had done more than spark desire. It had cemented a connection. A slow-burning intimacy had begun, one that would grow through shared moments, lingering glances, and touches that mattered. And in that quiet, sunlit office, I understood that the bond we were forming was no longer incidental. It was intentional, tender, and impossibly alive. It was late in the day, the office nearly empty, and the soft glow of the desk lamps cast long, quiet shadows across the room. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving only the faint hum of computers and the occasional clatter of a keyboard. I found her sitting at her desk, staring at a screen with a concentration that seemed almost meditative. I had stopped by with a simple question about the schedule, but as soon as I approached, I noticed something different, a softness in her expression, a hint of fatigue, or maybe something heavier, like a worry she had been carrying alone. "Do you have a moment?" she asked quietly, not looking up at first. There was a vulnerability in her voice, a hesitancy that pulled me closer without a single gesture. I nodded, moving to the chair beside her, aware of the small space we were sharing, the subtle warmth of proximity. The office suddenly felt intimate, private, even though it was usually just a functional workspace. She exhaled slowly, her fingers tapping lightly against the desk. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing, handling everything correctly," she confessed. Her voice was steady but carried the weight of unspoken tension. "It's exhausting to keep everything together, and sometimes it feels like no one notices." Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, and in that glance, I understood her completely. This wasn't about work. It was about trust, and she was letting me in. I leaned slightly closer, careful not to crowd her, letting my presence offer silent support. "I notice," I said simply, and I meant it. There was a pause, heavy with emotion, and I could feel the shift in the air between us. It was subtle, yet profound, the quiet understanding that comes from sharing something personal, from being truly seen. Her shoulders relaxed fractionally, her fingers stilling on the desk as if the simple acknowledgement had relieved some of the weight she carried. The moment lingered, and I felt my own heart respond, a mix of empathy, admiration, and something more tender that neither of us dared to name. I noticed the small details, the soft brush of her hair as she tucked it behind her ear, the delicate tilt of her head, the warmth radiating from her as she exhaled, letting down the professional armor that she wore so effortlessly during the day. Every movement, every pause, drew me closer emotionally, if not physically. For a few minutes, we simply sat together in silence, sharing the quiet intimacy of being present for one another. Occasionally, our shoulders brushed lightly as we reached for pens or folders, each touch lingering just a second longer than necessary, carrying an unspoken language of trust and quiet desire. That simple closeness, unforced and natural, deepened the connection between us far more than words ever could. By the time I left her desk, I realized that this shared vulnerability had shifted the dynamic completely. The attraction that had been simmering under the surface now had emotional depth. It wasn't just curiosity or physical tension. It was genuine care, understanding, and a slow-burning intimacy that neither of us could ignore. Every glance, every touch, every quiet moment from now on would carry the weight of this trust, building towards something inevitable and beautifully restrained. It was a quiet evening, the office almost deserted, bathed in the soft glow of overhead lights that reflected on polished surfaces. Only the hum of the air conditioner and the distant click of a keyboard filled the room. I was finishing some paperwork when I noticed her moving across the office, carrying a stack of files. Our eyes met, and for a moment, there was a flicker of hesitation, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had been growing between us over the past weeks. As she approached, one of the files slipped slightly from her grasp. I instinctively reached out to steady it, our fingers brushing together again. This time, the contact lasted a heartbeat longer than usual. It wasn't dramatic, just a fleeting touch, but it carried all the tension, restraint, and unspoken desire that had been building silently. We both paused, aware of the gravity in that small moment. Her eyes searched mine, revealing a mixture of acknowledgement, uncertainty, and something softer, almost hesitant. Later, we found ourselves alone at her desk while finalizing some paperwork. I caught a phrase from her conversation with a colleague echoing in my mind and misinterpreted it as concern or even disapproval directed at me. My chest tightened, and I sensed a subtle shift in her posture, the faint stiffening of shoulders, the slight narrowing of her gaze. I realized almost immediately that I might have read too much into it, but the moment was enough to send tension crackling between us. We both froze for a brief instant, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken assumptions. I could feel the quickening of her breath, the gentle pulse in her wrist as she adjusted the papers in front of her. Every small movement, the brushing of her hair from her face, the careful way she shifted her chair, felt amplified, charged with emotion neither of us dared to name aloud. Then came the subtle recognition, a shared understanding that neither misunderstanding nor hesitation could diminish what had been quietly forming between us. She offered a small, knowing smile, a delicate curve of her lips that softened the moment. I felt the tension melt just slightly, replaced by the warmth of connection and the unspoken acknowledgement that we were in this together. It was a silent, profound recognition. The attraction, the care, the slow-burn intimacy we shared was too strong to ignore, even amid hesitation and external pressures. We returned to our work, side by side, shoulders brushing occasionally, hands lingering near one another as if magnetized by the invisible pull of shared emotion. Each movement, each glance, carried a quiet message. I see you, I understand you, and I'm here. That recognition was intoxicating in its subtlety, the kind of intimacy that doesn't need words, only presence. By the end of the night, the office felt transformed. Every glance, every accidental touch, every pause between words held significance. The silent tension was no longer discomfort. It was anticipation, a quiet build-up toward resolution. The audience, like the narrator, could sense that the emotional stakes were at their peak, that the culmination of weeks of unspoken connection, trust, and restraint was approaching. And in that charged, quiet space, it was clear that what we had was not fleeting. It was deep, intentional, and quietly inevitable. The office was bathed in the gentle glow of the late afternoon sun, golden light streaming through the blinds and casting warm stripes across the polished floor. It was quieter than usual. Most of the staff had left, leaving only the soft hum of computers and the occasional shuffle of papers. Somehow, the empty office felt intimate, as if it had shrunk to hold only the two of us in this private, suspended moment. I approached her desk with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness, aware of the subtle shift in the air that had been building over weeks. She looked up at me, her eyes meeting mine with that familiar flicker of warmth and curiosity. There was a softness in her gaze that mirrored my own feelings, a recognition that the quiet tension, the slow-burning connection, had reached a natural point of acknowledgement. "Thanks for staying late with me," she said, her voice light but sincere, carrying that understated warmth that always seemed to fill the space between us. I smiled, feeling the pulse of familiarity and trust that had grown over shared glances, whispered confidences, and the fleeting, meaningful touches that had become our silent language. We both reached for the same document, and our hands met again. This time, there was no hesitation. Our fingers lingered together for a heartbeat, the warmth of her skin grounding me in a way that made everything else fade into the background. She didn't pull away immediately. Her hand rested lightly over mine, a gesture simple in action but profound in meaning. I could feel the subtle thrum of connection, the quiet acknowledgement of emotions we had both carried carefully, respectfully, for weeks. Then she leaned back slightly, offering me a small, knowing smile. It feels easier with you here," she murmured, her words soft but deliberate. I nodded, feeling a rush of affection and relief that the tension we had carried was transforming into something tender and affirming. We shared a quiet laugh over a small office mishap, and in that laughter, there was the ease of companionship, the comfort of mutual understanding, and the subtle recognition of desire tempered by respect. Our shoulders brushed as we stood side by side to organize the remaining files, a simple closeness that carried layers of meaning. The warmth of her presence, the softness of her voice, and the careful way she let me be near her all spoke louder than words ever could. It was the culmination of trust, restraint, and quiet longing. The kind of intimacy that doesn't need grand gestures, only consistent, meaningful attention and care. Before leaving, she rested her hand briefly on my arm, her thumb brushing lightly against my skin, a gesture that conveyed both reassurance and connection. I felt the steady warmth of her touch, the gentle heartbeat beneath it, and in that moment, everything we had shared, the confidences, the glances, the restrained touches, came together in quiet, satisfying resolution. As I walked toward the door, I realized that our story had reached a natural, complete arc. The slow-burn connection had matured into emotional intimacy, trust, and affection. There were no dramatic declarations, no reckless gestures, only the steady, meaningful recognition of care, desire, and respect. And in that gentle, golden-lit office, it was clear, what we had was real, tender, and wholly ours, kept in the quiet space where trust and affection meet. If you felt the slow-burn tension and quiet intimacy in this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more age gap romance tales that tug at the heart. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a connection that felt impossible yet undeniable? And hit the bell icon so you never miss our next story of forbidden attraction and tender moments.